Welcome back to another episode of The Conscious Artist, a safe space for conversations around mental health awareness for musicians, artists, and all human beings. I am your host, Pallavi Mahidara. I'm a concert pianist and teacher, and I am absolutely thrilled that you are joining us today. My hope for this show is that it will give all of us a sense of solidarity and knowledge that we are not alone, and together, through these conversations, we can create more awareness and change for a healthier future. My guest today is a musician turned physiotherapist. He played with the Baltimore Symphony Orchestra before an injury led him to a career change. He has since worked at the San Francisco Conservatory developing a health and wellness course and is currently a staff therapist for the National Home Health Agency. I'm very much looking forward to chatting with him today. Please join me in welcoming Jon Kretschmer to The Conscious Artist. Jon, thank you for taking the time to share your expertise with us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
The pleasure is all mine. Your background as a professional trumpet player provides you with a unique understanding of the demands of musicians, and I briefly mentioned it in the intro, but would you mind sharing your experience with your injury that led you to want to pursue a career change into physical therapy?
Yeah, of course. So just a little bit of background about me. I started off playing as a orchestral trumpet player in the Kalamazoo Symphony in Michigan and did about a 5-year career in that state. And then eventually won the audition for the Baltimore Symphony. And so when I got to the Baltimore Symphony, it was a immediate increase in amount of playing time. And I think at the time we only had 3 trumpet players. So there really was, normally a major orchestra like that would have 4 trumpet players, but there were only 3. So I was responsible for all of the second trumpet parts. And so that was not a playing load that I had been ever accustomed to. And in addition, I made the fatal mistake I now know of changing some of my equipment in order to blend sounds with the other members of the section a little better.
Mm-hmm.
And so all of that sort of overuse and change of equipment led to an injury. It turns out it wasn't a very serious injury, but at the time I didn't know that. I took about a month off immediately because I was feeling all this pain in my lip. And I ended up meeting a gentleman who became my mentor later, a gentleman by the name of David Schulman, who's a physical therapist in Towson, Maryland. And he helped me to understand what was happening with my body, understand what was happening with my lip, and provide so much education and information about the body that I really hadn't ever been aware of. And so that experience of rehabbing from the injury, I ended up going back and playing a whole nother full season with the Baltimore Symphony. But that experience as a patient in a physical therapy clinic really turned me on to the body, turned me on to the healing process. And then when my time with the Baltimore Symphony was over, I decided that rather than go straight back into the audition circuit, which is where I was successful at it, but not the best auditioner in the world, and I didn't feel like going back into that route. I decided to take some general courses like anatomy and physics and learned that I absolutely loved that. So I decided to change my career and go into physical therapy.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for sharing that story. And I think you highlight some really key elements that are so important in the music world and for all of us to be aware of, which is that, most of us don't think about the anatomy of our bodies. Most of us don't think about how our muscles work and how to use them in the healthiest way. We're not generally even taught that.
Mm-hmm.
And, for me, for example, I've suffered through 2 physical injuries in my life that were related directly to the piano. And it's really interesting. It was really interesting to think about as you were just explaining what happened. Like your lip muscles are so small, but so sensitive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's actually really remarkable how small they are. I won't go into details, but the very first thing you do is to become a physical therapist is you have to go through a dissection course, an anatomy course.
Oh boy.
And so, that involves doing a complete head to toe dissection of a donated cadaver. This is an individual who's lived their life and they've decided to donate their body to science. And so when we do the anatomy, I couldn't wait to get in there and see what the actual muscles look like. What is the tissue like? What is what are the layers? What's the skin, the fat, the muscle? And the orbicularis oris muscle that the trumpet player relies on on a day-to-day basis for hours and hours and hours at a time is like a couple of millimeters thick. I mean, it's the muscle itself is not robust. It's not super strong. So it's actually kind of a miracle that more people don't get injured. But going back to what you were saying earlier, I think in some ways it's good that the musician doesn't know a whole lot about anatomy, because when things are working well, you don't have to think about that stuff. That's not important. But, understanding what the body's warning signs are is important. And I think that doesn't get taught very much.
That's a very good point. Yeah.
Yeah, I think to a large part because successful and extremely successful musicians, as they're coming up through the conservatory route, the Juilliards, the Curtises, and even the state schools and stuff, for people who are deciding whether they want to go to performance, do they want to go to education, all of their teachers are themselves successful musicians who either haven't ever suffered an injury, or if they have suffered an injury, it was such a traumatic experience and they got through it, and thank God I'm on the other side. They don't even really bring it up. And so then when somebody has an injury, they're not really sure how to address it within the lesson space. And then, that leads to the injured musician trying to nowadays search Google for any sign of anybody who knows what they're talking about regarding the issue. I mean, it's a complicated thing for a musician who's not quite sure if their body is responding the same way.
That's a very, very valid point. And I wonder if it also has to do with a generational thing, because as you say, our former teachers either never suffered from injuries, or if they did, it wasn't talked about.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely.
And, today with my students, I make it a point of constantly reminding them to check themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Does it feel comfortable? What you're doing, do you feel your elbows locked or your wrist super tight, or do you feel yourself holding your breath? Of course, with wind instruments and brass instruments and singers, they can't hold their breath while playing, of course, but pianists and string instruments, we can play with holding our breath, and we're essentially cutting our abilities by half. I didn't learn about the importance of breathing and breathing correctly, and more than anything, exhaling while playing, until I had a physical injury that basically came from not breathing correctly. Like I was just shallow breathing into my chest instead of doing deep diaphragm breathing.
I mean, with trumpet players, we have to breathe. And so I think for trumpet players, breathing is taught at such a fundamental level on every single lesson, every single time. It's less of an issue with us, but I can absolutely see for people, and I do see for people with people who play piano, people who play violin, people who play percussion instruments. There's so much tension that gets built up because they're not actually cycling air through their body. And so then the body starts to tense, the body starts to put itself under more kind of self-imposed stress. And then that's kind of the place where injuries pop up.
Absolutely. And that's why I love what you said earlier about, learning the anatomy of your body. For example, I'm a small person. I'm 5'3", 163 centimeters, and I am capable of producing a very, very large and high quality sound that I think can rival someone who's twice my size. But it's taken years for me to learn how to use my muscles in a healthy way, in a way that helps to produce a good quality sound that's not harsh, that's not ugly.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that takes a lot of conscious thought and trial and error.
Yeah, it reminds me, actually, what you just said reminds me of a patient that I treated. She was a 17-year-old double bass player, pretty thin, not the most substantial body in the world. And of course, the stand-up bass is a very large instrument. It requires strength to play. And so she came to me for injuries with her mother, and she was talking about all of her favorite bass players. And, of course, Edgar Meyer pops up. And, so we looked at some YouTube, and we kind of zoomed in on it. I mean, have you seen his hands? I mean, they're just these mitts. There's these incredible power. I mean, talk about a hand that is designed and adapted and made for playing. And I said, okay, Miss Bass Player, look at your hand compared to his. You have different structure of anatomy trying to produce the same exact thing. If you are even 5% off of ideal technique, you're going to run yourself into the ground trying to play like this guy. And every individual, and it's not to say that she won't eventually get to become a great bass player, but if something that I see frequently is people in the development process of their craft trying to mimic and imitate the greats, but be aware that the greats are the greats for a reason. Their bodies are probably the perfect size for their instrument. This especially becomes important with guitar players. Most really great guitar players kind of just fit around the guitar, whereas people that I see who have injuries oftentimes are tall and lanky people, and they crowd their body over the guitar into really poor static postures. And it's like, okay, let's discuss, who are you looking at? Who are you copying? And a lot of the time you'll see these body mismatches in the injuries that I see, where an individual has not taken into account their own personal body size or their own personal body structure in adapting to their instrument. And so we'll have to have that discussion and say, like, well, you can't play in this way because it doesn't work for your body. Your forearms are too long. Just look at them. They're too long. There's nothing you can do about forearm length. So let's see if we can back this up, find you a better chair, find you a better pillow, a better posture to play in, and you can get the sound you want, but it's not going to be the same way that guy or gal does it, right? You have to make those adjustments. Sometimes people don't consider that. They think of their favorite player, they want to play just like them, and they copy everything about them to the T, and they forget the fact that their favorite player is 5'4" while they're 6'2". So there can be that mismatch.
Absolutely. It's funny you say that, because I literally say that to my students every lesson, that I'm offering you these tips, I'm offering you these suggestions, but you have to see if it works for you, because only you are inside your own body. Only you can know how it truly feels. And of course, as a teacher and as someone who has gone through injuries and really learned to play with like minimal effort for maximum result, of course I can see when something is tense. But at the end of the day, something that works super well for me may not be what works for them, because we're all built differently. And I think this idea of, well, they play like that, they're able to do that, so why can't I do the same? This idea of like copying someone else's technique or posture or position or whatever it is, I tell my students, never copy something you see someone else doing, especially physically, at your instrument, unless you know why they're doing it and how they're doing it.
That's great advice. That's really great advice.
Thanks. Well, I hope they listen.
Oh, it is. It absolutely is. I think it's less of an issue I keep, I drag it back to trumpet because that's for us. I come from the school in trumpet playing of just pick it up and blow. And if it doesn't sound right, make it sound right. And I always had a really hard time with that line of instruction because it seems so ethereal. Like, okay, well, where do I put my lips? What do I do with my breath? But at the end of the day, once you kind of get around to the expert level of playing, you actually do find that it really only matters what it sounds like. It doesn't matter how you're producing that sound. And so as a trumpet player, when you develop your ability to focus only on the sound and the music and what you're creating, when that system breaks and stops working, and you have to then recreate it with, possibly different tissue in your muscle. Maybe you've got a little bit of scar. Maybe there's a scar pocket there that's causing the lip to vibrate differently. Then that can be a real challenge for people. And oftentimes it is not it's not a very clean process making your way back.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And I think this idea of, I think there's a misconception, or at least maybe there was in sort of previous generations, or studying with professors and great artists from previous generations, which is that, you do whatever it takes to make it sound good. But I think it doesn't need to mean, kill yourself or work yourself into the ground.
Yes. Oh, so true. Yeah. Let me kind of let me refine what I said. Doing what it takes to sound good, in the sense that, on the other hand, if you were to just solely think about what is my lip doing, what is my air doing, etc., that takes you away from expressing the musical thought, right?
Right.
And so if you're focusing too much, and there's a lot of trumpet players out there that are just totally, they'll buzz on the mouthpiece for 2 hours at the beginning of the day. It's like, what are we doing here? Are we buzzing the mouthpiece or are we playing the trumpet?
Yeah.
If you're focusing too much on the physical aspect of what you're doing and not enough on the artistic aspect, you run yourself down the wrong path. On the other hand, if you're not thinking about the physical whatsoever, yeah, you're going to wake up the next morning. My face feels like hamburger meat. Why did this happen? Then there needs to be a little bit more introspection going on about what it is you're actually doing in order to create the sound you want to make. Because and I can think of times in my career, when I was playing really well, when I got hired by the BSO and the first couple months I was there, man, I could play anything. I mean, I felt like the most powerful player on earth. Register, bottom, top, whatever, everything was there until it wasn't, right? So how does that, where does that, how do you maintain the ability to do everything, right, and not push yourself over the edge? That's the hard thing, and I think people find it out too late. Really,
Yeah.
they have to go through some kind of incident where it's like, whoa, what happened to my chops? Where did they go?
Well, I think I think that's it. It's about balance, right? It's about finding that balance between your physical comfort, your musical ideas, how it sounds, and how you actually execute what it is you want to do. And it's kind of similar to, how we're always told, and we tell our own students, don't separate technique and music. They're not separate. Making a good quality sound or a good quality legato is technique. But that's also music, because that's how you make a phrase sound well and not everything super choppy or vertical or, and so I feel like there's this misconception that the two aren't related, that physical health and physical ease at your instrument. I feel like people don't realize how easily we can relate the two and find a way to have music help our physical aspect and our physical aspect help the music.
Yeah. You have to be in good physical shape to create the good music. And if the music isn't sounding good, there's probably at least partly a physical cause, and almost certainly a mental cause as well. Maybe your head's not in the right place or whatever.
100%. 100%. I mean, to be honest, I really believe that most of our physical pain or physical injuries come a lot from mental stress and tension. And I'm just curious, you mentioned earlier that, if you don't mind talking about it a little more, you mentioned earlier that you never felt like you were the greatest auditioner. And I'm curious to know if some of the stress that maybe had built up over time doing auditions, and I don't know if you did any competitions or things like that, but any of the high pressured situations, if that might have led to any part of your physical injury.
Yeah. No, actually. I never. No, the injury that I suffered really came about simply by me playing an absolutely insane amount of material on a week-to-week basis, and as a new member of a major orchestra, and I wasn't prepared for that. No, I don't think there is a way to prepare for that. But as far as the audition route, I actually experienced my greatest success in auditions when I just practice myself into the ground. I mean, I know that's probably not what we want to say here, but
No, but preparation is key.
but with preparation, I mean, and to say I was an unsuccessful auditioner is not entirely true. I mean, I got a couple runner-ups here and there in bigger orchestras.
No, but I didn't mean to to indicate that in any way.
No. I didn't take it. I didn't take it in a bad way. I also don't want to mischaracterize and say like making Baltimore was a fluke or anything. I was a pretty competitive auditioner for a good 4, 5, 6 years. But when I say that I wasn't a terribly good auditioner, more often than not, when I get into the semis and finals, I would think too much. There would just be too much thought. You can't be thinking at that place. You have to just execute, right? All the thought should happen before that. But to your question, I don't think that I had. There were never any injuries related to the preparation for auditions or the stress involved with auditions. I don't think that I was the best. I didn't have the most effective stress coping mechanisms back in those days, but I didn't actually ever get physically injured from the process, I suppose.
Okay. That's very interesting and also very important, I think, to identify and to talk about, because even with my own physical injuries, I wouldn't say that they came specifically from mental stress. I mean, the first injury that I had was in a tendon. It wasn't tendonitis, but it was in a tendon above my wrist on my left arm. And it came from simply over practicing and trying to learn Rachmaninoff's Second Piano Concerto in like a week. And yeah, I mean, I was, a teenager and
Yeah,
thought I was
yeah, of
invincible.
course.
But I think over the years, the way I have dealt with stress has led to, I think, a lot of tension that will stay in my body. And for so many years, I just assumed that having tension in my neck, in my shoulders, and my upper back, having knots, really hard as rock knots, was just a daily part of my life. And it's only in the last, I would say, couple years, I had a third injury, which was not music related. It was actually yoga related, where I was doing some yoga positions and kind of was dumping into my lower back and threw my lower back out. And after that, this was, I would say, like 3 years ago, my physiotherapist explained to me how vital it is for my core muscles to be strong. And, no one had ever really explained that to me before, that the fact that I sit for the majority of my day means my back muscles need to be strong. And for my back muscles to be strong, my core muscles need to be strong. And we don't think about these things as musicians. You said earlier that it's important to be in good physical shape. We don't think about this. We don't remember that we are athletes too, and that we need to treat our bodies as such.
Yeah, yeah. I think in my first lecture, so in the lecture series that I created for the conservatory, I don't know, it was my fifth slide. I put up a picture of a Ferrari, a nice, gorgeous sports car. And it's like, you are this elite machine. This is you. And like any elite machine, it has to be maintained. It has to be oiled. It has to be, calibrated. That's something that I think. I also make the comparison of high-level athletes, football players, baseball players. These individuals have a whole staff of PTs and ATs and doctors that are, right there the second anything happens.
Exactly.
And musicians don't have that. We just sort of are in our practice rooms winging it the whole time. And so it would be nice if there was a bit of a shift in that sense. It would be nice for conservatories to take that a little more seriously.
Agreed, 100%.
Having been on the inside of some of those discussions, I'm not sure that that'll happen anytime soon because money is such an issue. How do you pay these highly qualified clinicians, right? And how do you organize that through their insurance? I mean, that's a whole nother discussion. But in any case, yeah, you have to maintain the body as if you are an athlete. So, seeing people not take care of their bodies and trying to perform these outrageous musical feats, you're gonna exhaust yourself. The body has to be in good shape.
And also from all the traveling that we do, the number of hours that if you're an orchestra that you're sitting playing, if you're a pianist or cellist sitting and playing, or even standing with your instrument, I mean, it's exhausting after a while if you're not in good peak physical shape. And I want to point out that it's not about like having big muscles. In fact, playing most instruments does not require big muscles. It's much more about using your brain to understand how your muscles work rather than like brute force. And from what I've understood from some friends who are very much into bodybuilding or things like this, that having like two overdeveloped biceps or forearms, depending on your instrument, can actually inhibit some technique and like flexibility and dexterity with the instrument, because we are using, for the most part, fine muscles. But like with big chords, or I mean, of course, I'm speaking for pianists, but like producing a big sound on the piano or big chords comes from our back first and foremost. It's, using our natural body weight and using the sound coming from our back, opening up the channels between joints and muscles, from our fingertips all the way down to our lower back, and really feeling grounded in our bodies.
Yeah, and a lot of those concepts that you're talking about now, I have a very unique view of it, having gone through the physical therapy education process. I mean, it's a 3-year doctoral level examination of the physiology and the anatomy and the forces and the physics and all of this. And what you're really talking about when you're saying, okay, it comes from the back and you have to use your body, you're talking about using the body in the most efficient manner possible to produce a result.
Yes, absolutely.
And that has to do with a concept in PT that we call the length tension relationship. So if you think of a muscle, what is a muscle, right? Muscle serves to move the skeleton, right? That's all it does. And in some cases, it moves soft tissue. But in general, a muscle simply is a contractile tissue that is controlled by the brain to produce movement. And so that muscle can either be small or it can be large. The larger it is, the stronger it is, right? You think of the muscle of the orbicularis around the lips for a trumpet player, very small, not much force. You think about the gluteus maximus muscle that controls hip extension in the bottom. That's a very large muscle, right? That's going to produce a ton of force. And so each muscle in our body has a very specific design and a very specific method of movement, and it has a limit to how much it can move, right? Every joint in our body has a specific range of motion that it's designed to go through. Every time that you wrap your hands around your instrument or you form your body around your instrument, you're setting your body up in a position that allows your muscles to move. If the position is not correct, the muscles are either working too hard for their size, potentially. Maybe the muscles are in too short of a position or too long of a position to be effective. And so, like, in my mind, when I'm looking at somebody playing and I'm taking a look at their posture, I'm thinking to myself, now that I know all of the bones and the muscles and everything, it's like, oh yeah, obviously that muscle is way too short. Oh, that muscle is way too long. Okay, we got to. And then that begins the process of altering somebody's posture into the best possible place for them. So zooming back away from the PT brain and back into the music brain, oftentimes what it ends up being is somebody working too hard at something and not getting the result that they're looking for, or they are actually not working hard enough. There's this concept in trumpet playing all the time where people are saying, oh, don't play with any tension. Oh, you should, be able to play a trumpet with hanging from a string from the ceiling. It's like, that is insane. I don't know where these people get these ideas, because believe you me, it takes a lot of pressure, a lot of tension, a lot of energy to play the trumpet well. But in the moment, if you're playing music, you're not cognitively conscious of all of that tension because you don't need to be. It's not important. But the actual physical activity of playing the trumpet, yeah, it takes a ton of tension, ton of effort. So it's fine. It's really just finding the balance.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like there's a misconception that the opposite of tense muscles or the opposite of tension is relaxation, like relaxed muscles. But in my experience, and please correct me if I'm wrong and highlight what is correct, but in my experience, the opposite of tense muscles is engaged muscles. That I am relaxed when I'm playing, sure, because I'm not holding tension, but they're engaged. Those muscles are engaged. They're being used, but in a healthy way.
Yeah, I would argue that the tension, the concept, you've said it a couple times now, the concept of tension and negative or maladaptive tension, or tension that you don't want. I would argue that those are areas of the body that are being contracted for long periods of time without rest, and you're not aware that you're doing it.
Right.
And so what ends up happening is when you're holding these muscles in static positions for long periods of time, we call that isometric movement, right? Isometric, same distance. There's no movement, but the actual muscle is engaging. It is being sent a signal from the brain to contract, and it is losing strength and losing energy over time. And when the body is not rested significantly, right, there can be long-term changes that take place within a muscle. So you think about this from the perspective of, say, take a piano player, for instance, who hangs their head too much over the keyboard. Okay. And then think about the muscles in the back of the neck that need to offset the gravity that's pulling the head down. The head weighs about 10 to 12 pounds. And so there are muscles in the back of the neck that need to withstand the force of gravity pulling the head down. Well, those neck muscles, they're not doing anything for playing the piano. They're not creating sound. They're not creating music. But those neck muscles are actively working every second that player is hunched over the keyboard.
Right.
And so what will end up happening is over time, they'll start saying, oh man, my neck really hurts. Why is my neck really hurt? Well, it's because you're actually using it a lot when you're playing. You just don't know you're doing it. So it's identifying these sort of wasted areas of effort.
I like that, wasted areas of effort. I think that's important because as you said earlier, finding the most efficient way for your body. And if you think about it, sitting at the piano, sitting at a computer, sitting at a desk, very similar, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, they're not similar. They're the same. You're talking about static occupational postures. The person standing at the cashier's desk, checking you out. Same thing.
Yeah. And with piano, for example, like I would say probably of all the instruments, the piano might be the most symmetrical one for our bodies, like the way one of the most that we're sitting down and, our hands are in front of us. It's not that one arm is raised like the violin, for example, is violin, cello, they're not symmetrical. However, because our arms are always down, very often, at least in my experience, what I've noticed is that my shoulder muscles, like the muscles between my shoulders and my neck, those muscles in that area, in that region, are overworked because I don't realize, the amount of tension that ends up creeping up there if I'm sitting for too long, or if, when I was younger, when I would maintain that tension by pulling up my shoulders a little or crunching my neck. Now, of course, I'm much more aware of that. But I learned late in my life so far, that I needed to actually strengthen those muscles as well, counter the movement, because I spend so much of my time with my arms down that I don't have that strength.
I'm so glad you said that. I'm so glad you said the word strengthen. I really am. That's great. Totally being honest. Like, I'm so glad you said that. I think now's the time. I want to say this. There is a difference in pain, right? There's a difference between pain from overworking, and there's a difference between pain from being very weak.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Oftentimes, what I will find with musicians, and just about everybody, I mean, PTs kind of see this on a daily, but you will find somebody who does something for long periods of the day. Oftentimes it's computer workers, oftentimes, but they will be doing the same thing kind of every day. That's sort of the daily grind of human life, I guess. And so they'll go to the PT. The PT will take a look at them and they'll say, okay, muscles A, B, and C are super overworked. Muscles D, E, and F are very, very weak. So let's chill these muscles out, relax them. Let's strengthen these muscles and get them stronger so that we can get the whole system back into balance. And sure enough, the PT is the miracle worker. It's like we have the hand of God. We take the pain away. But it's only because we've basically kind of reset the system and said, okay, identified where the kinesiology and the biomechanics are off and just fix them. So for the piano player, oftentimes what you're talking about with pain in the back, you were kind of referring specifically to the trapezius muscle.
Right.
Well, the trapezius muscle is one of many muscles in the back. There's 17 muscles in total that surround the scapula, for instance.
Yeah.
And so any one of those muscles could be off too. It's not just the trapezius. And then forget about all the muscles, the cervical stabilizers that are below the trapezius, like the splenius capitis, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I could go on. But the body is this miraculously tuned instrument. And when you're doing static postures over static posture after static posture over time, that whole system can get out of whack. And that's the purpose of the PT, really, in kind of Western medical science. You have other sciences like acupuncture, yoga, meditation, et cetera, that are sort of different approaches to the same basic concept, which is how do the body's out of whack, how do you get it back into shape?
Back into alignment, back into balance. Yeah.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And how can you identify that for yourself as a musician too? Because oftentimes we learn to become aware of this stuff far too late.
Exactly. And that leads me to my next point, which is, we can't all become physical therapists.
Why not? It's only 3 years, 3,500 hours of lecture. It's not much.
No, but I think it's so important for us to learn a little bit about it, to learn a little bit about our bodies. And what you said earlier, the difference between pain from overworking, which could be like soreness or like feeling tired in your muscles, to put it in like layman's terms,
Can feel burny.
versus pain from weak muscles. Like I can feel the difference 100%. I had, recently I was dealing with some sciatica, and I wasn't able to work out for almost 2-3 months. And until then, for the previous almost 2 years, I was regularly exercising, strong, really taking care of my mind and my body through exercise. And those 2-3 months that I wasn't able to work out, it affected everything. I mean, I felt I was back to feeling the way I was a couple of years ago when I had the lower back injury from yoga. And, of course, it was affecting my mental health as well, because I wasn't able to exercise. And so I was holding on to stress in a much more unhealthy way. And then because I was worried about my physical state, I felt like I was adding more tension back into my body. And it was just this vicious cycle.
Yeah. Yeah.
But going back to this point, as I said, we cannot all become physical therapists, but what are some general things that musicians need to regularly be aware of? Like, what are some things that we can identify when we're practicing, when we're sleeping, when we're walking, that we can really start to be conscious of on a daily basis?
Goodness. That's a big question. I think, well, maybe I'll answer it in terms of the things that I see regularly with people.
Mm-hmm.
These are people anywhere from your high school and college age pre-professional. I mean, you and I are talking from the position of like the professional musical world, but there's a lot more people out there that are amateurs and
Sure.
that are, that place purely for enjoyment. They
Sure,
don't
sure.
get their income from it. But one of the very, very most common things that I see, I mean, it happens all of the time, is that somebody will come to see me who's in either high school or college. And it's so funny. It's almost always in October or November, and I'll let your listeners kind of guess why as I tell the story. But it's almost always in October or November, and they'll come to me and they'll say, "My God, I have pain doing this, or I have pain when I play. It really hurts right here." And then it's my job to kind of inquire, like, okay, ask all the right questions. So the questions that I'm asking are, okay, what's going on? What are you doing right now? Oh, well, I've been practicing for this recital that I have coming up.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, oh, okay. How long have you been practicing for that? Oh, pretty much since the start of the school year. I've been really working hard. I'm working with my teacher on this, X, Y, Z. I was like, oh, okay. Well, how many hours a day are you practicing? Well, and this varies by instrument, but I'm playing 2 hours. I'm playing 6 hours, whatever. I say, okay, all right. So I'm trying to get a feel for, their day to day. What are they doing with their bodies? Oh, okay. Well, what else do you do? Oh, well, I'm also on the swim team. Oh, cool. Okay, good. Anything else that you do? Yeah, I'm a competitive e-gamer. Whatever. Like, you just start asking and asking, and these people are just loading themselves with these activities, and their bodies literally are not resting.
Yeah.
Right? You start to find this. Oh, okay. Well, what did you well, let's go back a bit further. What did you do before the school year? Well, my parents and I took a vacation, for 2 months to the Sahara Desert where we, whatever. I'm just making stuff up, but they weren't doing anything in August. And then all of a sudden September hits and they go full bore, balls to the walls, doing a million things plus
Yeah.
playing a
Yeah.
ton. And then it's October and September and October, maybe November-ish. And they're wondering what happened. What's going on? Well, what happened was you took time off, so your body is starting to atrophy and decline.
Right.
You started up without an adequate build-up period, and now you're reaping the rewards a couple months later. That's what's happened. Okay, so it's understanding that, like, okay, if you're now, and now I'm going to kind of shift towards the pre-professional, professional crowd. If you are trying to develop the ability to be professional and to play professionally, that requires basically a year-long, lifelong commitment to stay in relatively good shape. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to play every single day, but it does mean that you have to be strategic about the time that you play and the time that you don't play. So for some people, that means, well, I just don't play on Sundays. I take one day a week off to let my body rest totally, and that refreshes my mind. Some people, they will play for a month or two, and then they'll take a week off completely. And they know that that works for them. Some people might say, well, I don't play past 8 p.m. or whatever, so that they give themselves plenty of time to recoup and recover for the next day. So very often, not everybody can become a PT, but everybody can take a look at their daily schedule. They can look at what they're doing. They can look at how are they practicing, and is that amount of practice appropriate for their place and time, right? If you've gone on a 2-week vacation and you've come back and you've got a recital within 2 weeks, that's a recipe for disaster.
Right.
Just like you found when you were practicing Rachmaninoff in your left wrist. That happens very, very frequently. So that would be one thing. It's like, identify what your day-to-day routine looks like, and if it seems out of balance, if it seems kind of crazy, if you seem stressed, if you seem like you can't quite get a grip on all of it, then there needs to be maybe some adjustment there. And then the next thing that I would say is to understand the 3 types of use. And this is something that I teach in my class. You can misuse your body in one of 3 ways. You can overuse it, you can misuse it, and you can abuse it. And it's really important to understand the difference between the 3 of those, okay? Overuse is exactly what it sounds like. You're simply doing something too much. Even if you're using the right technique or the correct fingering patterns or whatever. Overuse simply means you're doing it too much for the body to recover from on a long-term basis, because when you're sleeping at night, the body is recovering.
Exactly.
But
yes.
If you're overusing it and doing something too much, your body can't recover. Eventually, the tissues lose integrity, and then you experience injury. The second type of use is misuse, where you are playing with poor technique, right? You're not using your body correctly, and the body, and you may or may not know that you're doing this, right? You may or may not know that you're using poor technique, but you're misusing your body. You're not using the body in the correct way, and that eventually leads to injury. That's why we go to teachers. That's why we try to learn optimal techniques, so we avoid that one as much as possible. The third is abuse, where you're doing something you shouldn't be doing, but you're going to do it anyway. And musicians do that all the time when they practice, until 3 a.m, right?
Or
It's
playing
like,
through an injury, or
playing through an injury, or whatever. Yeah, exactly. So I like to kind of characterize the use of our bodies, right? Because our bodies are making the music, not the instrument. The body is making the music. The use of our body into those 3 categories, and you kind of check in with yourself once a day. Am I doing any of these 3 things? If I am, well, okay, back off, recalibrate, and then go from there. Try to adjust what you're doing from that place. I think that if people simply increase their awareness a little bit about what they do on a day-to-day basis, a lot of these issues could be headed off significantly.
I love that. Everything you've just said is essentially saying practice mindfully, be mindful.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. Oh yeah. Yeah, we're all saying the same stuff.
We're all saying the same stuff. And but it's
Absolutely.
I love the way you explained use and misuse of one's body. And that I think is so important to be able to identify those differences. So I really thank you for explaining that to our listeners.
Yeah, of course.
And what you said before that about knowing the kind of rest that your body needs. For me, for example, I tend to be more extreme. So when I have a lot of work going on, I will work a lot. I make sure on a day-to-day basis that I do take enough time to rest my body, whether it's, not practicing after 9 p.m. or whether it's, but, even then with heavy programs, or if I have, like 4 different programs in 3 weeks, then of course it requires a lot of hours. It's just simply a lot of hours.
Sure. You can't get away from that as a musician.
Exactly. But then I do also know that sometimes for my mind, if I've had a very long, stressful period, I do need maybe a week off.
Mm-hmm.
I do need a significant amount of time off in order to just clear my head, detox from the go kind of feeling that was existing, to sort of reset. And I notice, thankfully, because I teach, it's not that I'm not touching the piano. I am still at the instrument, working with my students, thinking about the music and the physicality of the instrument. But I think it's so important, as you said, when you've taken a break, to start back slowly.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
I'm going to
Oh,
repeat that.
100%.
Like you cannot run a marathon after having not run for like a month and then you decide, okay, next week I'm going to run a marathon. No one would do that in their
Yeah.
right
Yeah.
mind. But somehow like we think we can do that because we've been playing our instruments for so many years.
Well, and think about, I always, in my playing days, I always used to say to myself, like, okay, if I take 12 hours off, I know it. If I take 18 hours off, my chair partner knows it. And if I take a day off, everybody knows it.
Mm.
Because you lose that sort of like sharpness, that uber dialed in feeling.
Mm-hmm.
But the other thing I kind of want to mention, and I want to get this in here too, is that what gets you to the higher and higher levels is not necessarily what keeps you at the highest and highest levels, right? I wish I had known that and had accepted that and had understood that, because I was, by the time I got to Baltimore, I was still doing my 45-minute warm-up. And then I'm going into rehearsal, blowing my face off. And that's not a recipe for success long term. And I think one of my colleagues even said, listen, what it took to get here is not the same as what it's going to take to stay here. You have to kind of reevaluate that as your career progresses, of like, what is actually required. Do I have to play this scale 500 times before I then go and start practicing? Well, no, you don't. That's just kind of wasted time on the hand. And so I would urge all your listeners to kind of say, okay, what part of your practice routine is necessary still, and what part of your practice routine is not necessary anymore? Do you truly need to play 10 minutes of long tones? Could it suffice with 3? Could you get away with 4? Right? Trying to keep pruning back all of this stuff that we learn over our lifetimes and say, okay, what works? It takes every 6 months. Do I really need to keep practicing those double tonguing pattern? Is it ingrained enough? Because at some point, things get ingrained to a point that they don't ever leave, right? I can still finger as fast as I ever did. Sorry to say, I haven't touched a trumpet in 6 months. It's like, I can still play really fast. Can I play high? No, because my lip is atrophied.
Right.
The body, from a physiologic perspective, in terms of like coming back after a rest, has one job, and that is to conserve energy, like from an evolutionary standpoint. So if you've built up a muscle to be able to lift 1,000 pounds, if you stop lifting that 1,000 pounds, the body instantly knows, because you're not doing it anymore. It knows hormonally and all of this other crazy physiology stuff that you don't need that amount of muscle tissue to be maintained, and it starts paring it away instantly. I mean, this happens within hours. Okay. That's why we have to keep practicing in order to maintain. So if you take a week off, your body is physiologically in a weaker state for playing. So you must take at least a week to build it back up to expect to be able to play at the same level that you were at when you took time off. It's basically a 2-to-1. So if you take a week off, you can expect that you'll need 2 weeks to get back to it. If you take 2 weeks off, and we're talking off, like not playing, take 2 weeks off, it's going to take 4 weeks to get back to it from a physiologic strength standpoint.
Right. Absolutely. No, I think it's such an important point that you've made, and thank you for sharing it. The idea that you mentioned earlier of tweaking your practice to where you are in your life, I think is so important. We're constantly evolving, growing, adapting, changing. We don't need to be doing the same things now that we did when we were 15 or 20 or 25 or even 30, like we learn. It ties back to mindful practicing. If you know that something works and you found a way to make something work consistently, I think there's a way to also find how to maintain that consistently without, as you say, practicing it the way you did before in order to reach that point.
Yeah, we can fall into our crutches, oh, I know I'm going to be playing well if I do this for 10 minutes.
But then that's mindless kind of repetition, kind of autopilot a little bit.
A little bit. Yeah, that is. Yeah, you're kind of almost relying on crutches, but trying to constantly re-examine, well, can I still feel comfortable at 5 minutes? Would that work? And sometimes you have to kind of go for it. You have to say, okay, I'm only going to warm up for this show for 10 minutes and that's it. I'm going to go out there and see how it goes. and then you'll learn. You'll figure out whether that works or not for you. There's a little bit of that has to happen. But it is really, really important that as you start playing more, especially in the professional world and in the soloing world and all of that, is to really identify what you have to do and what you don't have to do. Because oftentimes people are doing just way, 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 way too much to get the job done.
I love that. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for being here. Thank you for this conversation. I think it was very illuminating and very helpful. I hope it'll be very helpful for our listeners, certainly for me. And thank you for sharing everything with us.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you all so much for listening. I am truly grateful for the support from each and every one of you. If you would like to submit any questions or topics for us to address on the show, you can send us a message on our Instagram page @ConsciousArtistPodcast. Help us to spread more awareness by sharing this episode with your friends, your colleagues, your teachers, and your students. And don't forget to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Sending you all so much love and strength to tackle this week, and we'll see you next Monday for another episode of The Conscious Artist.